The naval operations in the Dardanelles Campaign of the First World War were mainly carried out by the Royal Navy with substantial support from the French and minor contributions from Russia and Australia. The Dardanelles Campaign began as a purely naval operation. When that failed to overcome Ottoman defences, an invasion of the Gallipoli Peninsula was launched in which naval forces were heavily involved. Throughout the campaign, attempts were made by submarines to pass through the Dardanelles and disrupt Ottoman Empire shipping in the Sea of Marmara. Prelude. At the outbreak of the First World War, the Ottoman Empire was an unaligned power. While Britain had a long history of interest in the region, Germany had been most active in cultivating a relationship with the Ottomans. At the outbreak of war, the British confiscated 2 battleships constructed for the Ottoman Empire, which were still in British shipyards. In response, Germany made a gift of 2 ships, the battlecruiser SMS Goeben and the light cruiser SMS Breslau, as replacements. While still operated by their German crews, these ships, renamed Yavuz Sultan Selim and Midilli, respectively, became the backbone of the Ottoman Navy. Through possession of Yavuz Sultan Selim, the Ottoman Empire controlled the most powerful ship in the Black Sea in 1914. Closure of the Dardanelles. In October 1914, the Ottomans closed the Dardanelles to Allied shipping. This followed an incident on the 27th of September, when the British Dardanelles squadron had seized an Ottoman torpedo boat. The actual decision to close the strait seems to have been taken by German military advisors stationed in the Dardanelles without reference to the Ottoman government. On the 28th of October, the Ottoman fleet, led by Yavuz Sultan Selim, began raiding Russian assets in the Black Sea. Odessa and Sevastopol were bombarded, a mine layer and gunboat were sunk. The real aim of the attack, putting the Russian Black Sea Fleet out of commission, was not accomplished. Russia declared war on the Ottoman Empire on the 2nd of November, and the British followed suit on the 6th of November. An unsuccessful Ottoman attack on Russia through the Caucasus Mountains was launched in December, leading the Russians to call for aid from Britain in January 1915. Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, had entertained plans of capturing the Dardanelles as early as September 1914. In a New Year review submitted to the Prime Minister, H. Asquith, he had outlined 2 possible new fronts against the Germans, intended to break the stalemate and accompanying enormous loss of life which had rapidly set in on the Western Front. The first possibility, which was then his favoured option, was an invasion of Schleswig-Holstein by sea, allowing Denmark to join the Allies and give Russia a supply route via the Baltic Sea. The other was an attack on the Dardanelles, which again would give Russia a supply route and might encourage Bulgaria and Romania to join the Allied side. The Russian plea for assistance, coupled with a perception of the Ottoman Empire as a weak enemy, made the prospect of a campaign in the Dardanelles seem appealing. Divided responsibilities. Matters were complicated for Churchill by the choice of First Sea Lord, who was the most senior admiral in charge of running the navy. Churchill had appointed Prince Louis of Battenberg in 1912. He was obliged to replace Battenberg because of public feeling against Germans. Battenberg had become a British citizen when he joined the navy at the age of 14, but he spoke with a German accent. His choice was to recall the 73-year-old Admiral John Fisher, who had retired as First Sea Lord in 1910. Fisher was regarded as brilliant, but somewhat in decline from advancing age. More immediately a problem for Churchill, he was a forceful personality accustomed to directing the Admiralty himself, and being supported in his decisions by the political First Lord rather than taking orders from him. Fisher was appointed at the end of October 1914 and favoured a new campaign in Northern Europe, which perhaps reflected the Navy's traditional concern of controlling Channel waters. He reluctantly agreed to advance the plan for a naval action in the Dardanelles, but afterwards maintained that he had never supported it, and had always believed a naval action would have to be accompanied by a land force. Churchill and Fisher continually quarreled throughout the campaign, and Fisher finally resigned on 15 May 1915 after repeated threats to do so. Fisher wrote about Churchill, "He is always convincing me." Fisher's relationship with Churchill had always been complex, and his abrupt resignation was no exception. Fisher's resignation, on top of poor progress in the campaign, precipitated the fall of the government and Churchill's replacement as First Lord. So neither man gained control of the Admiralty. Ironically, although they could not agree, both respected the other and would not have wished that outcome. On the 11th of January, at Churchill's request, the commander of the Royal Navy's Mediterranean Squadron, Vice Admiral S.H. Carden, proposed a plan for forcing the Dardanelles using battleships, submarines and minesweepers. On 13 February, the British War Council approved the plan, and Carden was supplied with additional pre-dreadnought battleships. The battleship HMS Queen Elizabeth and the battlecruiser HMS Inflexible. France supplied a squadron which included 4 pre-dreadnought battleships, while Russia provided the light cruiser Voskhod. The operation was originally intended to be purely naval due to a lack of available troops and the independence of Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill, but by early February, it was decided that more regular infantry was needed. Contingents of Royal Marines were to be supplemented by the last unallocated regular division, the British 29th Division. It was dispatched to Egypt, to join Australian and New Zealand troops which were already undergoing training. At the outset of the operation, the expected role of the infantry was to be the occupation of Constantinople. The taking of the Straits was to be accomplished by the Entente naval forces. Forcing the Straits. On 3 November 1914, Churchill ordered the first British attack on the Dardanelles following the opening of hostilities between Ottoman and Russian empires. The British attack was carried out by battle cruisers of Carden's Mediterranean Squadron, HMS Indomitable and Indefatigable, as well as the obsolete French battleships Suffren and Verite. This attack actually took place before a formal declaration of war had been made by Britain against the Ottoman Empire. The intention of the attack was to test the fortifications and measure the Ottoman response. The results were deceptively encouraging. In a 20-minute bombardment, a single shell struck the magazine of the fort at Sed El Bahr at the tip of the Gallipoli Peninsula, displacing 10 guns and killing 86 Turkish soldiers. Total casualties during the attack were 150, of which 40 were German. The most significant consequence was that the attention of the Ottomans was drawn to strengthening their defences, and they set about expanding the minefield. The Dardanelles were defended by a system of fortified and mobile artillery arranged as the outer, intermediate, and inner defences, while the outer defences lay at the entrance to the straits and would prove vulnerable to bombardment and raiding. The inner defences covered the Narrows, the narrowest point of the straits near Canakkale. Beyond the inner defences, the straits were virtually undefended. However, the foundation of the straits' defences were a series of 10 minefields, laid across the straits near the Narrows and containing a total of 370 mines. What was to become the Battle of Gallipoli, a 10-month battle of attrition, began at 7:30 on 19 February 1915. 2 destroyers were sent in to probe the straits. The first shot was fired from Kumkala by the Ohari Tepa battery's 240mm Krupp guns at 7:58. The battleships HMS Cornwallis and Vengeance moved in to engage the forts, and the first British shot of the campaign proper was fired at 9:51 by Cornwallis. The day's bombardment lacked the spectacular results of the 3rd of November test. Another attempt was made on the 25th of February. This time the Ottomans evacuated the outer defences and the fleet entered the straits to engage the intermediate defences. Demolition parties of Royal Marines raided the Sed El Bahr and Kumkale forts, meeting little opposition. On the 1st of March, 4 battleships bombarded the intermediate defences. Little progress was made clearing the minefields. The minesweepers, commanded by Carden's Chief of Staff, Roger Keyes, were merely unarmored trawlers manned by their civilian crews who were unwilling to work while under fire. The strong current in the straits further hampered the sweeping process. This lack of progress by the fleet strengthened the Ottoman resolve, which had wavered at the start of the offensive. On the 4th of March, raids on the outer defences were resisted, leaving 23 Marines dead. Queen Elizabeth was called on to engage the inner defences, at first from the Aegean coast near Gaba Tepe, firing across the peninsula, and later from within the straits. On the night of the 13th of March, the cruiser HMS Amethyst led 6 minesweepers in an attempt to clear the mines. 4 of the trawlers were hit and Amethyst was badly damaged, with 19 stokers killed from a single hit. On the 15th of March, the Admiralty informed Carden that they agreed to his plan for a further all-out attack by daylight, with the minesweepers operating under the direct protection of the entire fleet. Carden was taken ill the same day, and had to be replaced by Rear Admiral John de Robeck. A gunnery officer noted in his diary that de Robeck had already expressed misgivings with the likelihood of being able to silence the Ottoman guns by bombardment, and that this view was widely held on board the ship.